and welcome to the Aotearoa Rugby Pod once again. The All Blacks come back hard, but have they come back hard enough to make you think they can beat South Africa in South Africa? There's plenty to chat about there. It was a very strong performance against Argentina, a big change on the gain line, and plenty of good tries scored. Different selections out wide. There's plenty to talk about how that played out and how that will affect them when they go to South Africa to play those two tests in 2 weeks' time. So, plenty there. The South Africans themselves steamroll Australia again in the second half. So we'll look at that with a completely different team, what they're looking like, and if there's anything there. Is there a chink in their armour? Did Australia see anything there at all to make us think that they won't just roll through the Rugby Championship? Plenty to talk about there. Of course, your questions, your emails from the YouTube comments section. Person who wins with the best question goes in to get the Players Sport Gilbert Ball. So there's that too, as well as this week. We're going to give away 2 prizes. Sam Whitelock, view from the second row. All-time great All Black. Got plenty to say in his book about his time there, and that was a long time there, Jipper. It was a very long time there.
Especially for a blues hooker. Tormented.
As ever, James Parsons in studio.
How are?
Up in the Birkenhead studio, Bryn Hall. Brinner, you feeling good, mate, after the weekend?
Probably not feeling great with a loss like that, but yeah, obviously it was a good contest against the Bay. Would have been great to get the points, but unfortunately we've got to go back into round 3. So we're more than happy to talk about the All Blacks, where there was a lot more positive light, Ross and Jipper, that we'll dive into. So yeah, it was good for those boys to get that result after a tough one in Wellington.
Okay, well, let's start there then. What did you like the most? What areas did you see the most significant improvement? And I'd like to maybe answer that in the context of where it leaves them heading to South Africa.
Yeah, look, I think set piece was a massive part of it. I think whether it was through the scrum dominance and then them actually being able to have scrums was massively important, and we probably saw that the Argentinians weren't able to stop Tamati Williams and the aid of the All Blacks. I thought their line-out maul was really good as well. They wanted to go through them and were able to get some really good dominance around that, and the exit play. It was a big talking point last week in terms of them not getting that right. They were able to kick long. They didn't kick a lot of TJ Perenara in that first half, and were able to kick through the middle with Damien McKenzie and finding some grass and being able to exit really well. And then also Jip and Ross, I thought their intent, it was pretty evident within that first 2 minutes that they were there to play. You could see them working off the ball. They were like possessed demons, really, just trying to be every single way. And I guess they punched the Argentinians on the nose, and the Argentinians weren't able to bounce back from that. So I think those areas that I have touched on, Ross, the set piece is really important. That's going to be massive for the South Africans. They pretty much were able to dominate the Australians in that second part of the test match on the weekend, so that'll be a big area. And I think our kicking game was awesome compared to where we were in that first part of the test match in Wellington. Around
that intent, first and foremost, Artie probably nailed it at the end of the game, where he said it shouldn't take a loss to bring that intent. So, you know, you can still see that hurts there, and they know the challenge that's ahead of them going to South Africa. So I think that was a key message for me, understanding that they know that one result doesn't mean that you're going to just be able to turn up the following week. They've learnt from their mistake, and hopefully will be better for it. Secondly, I thought their ability to adjust on the run or just when they were put under pressure, rather than being stubborn and keep going back to the same thing, one charge down, then it was like, okay, we'll go back to Damien, we'll kick long, we'll find grass. Their kick strategy found grass, whether it was an attacking kick or a long kick. And then even the line-out. I think the first line-out went to the back and it was disrupted or lost. And then from then on, it was 100% and it was run front middle. You know, so they really were like, okay, possession and everything needed to be played on their terms, and they had that ability to adjust and know what they needed to do that. So yeah, a lot to like, and to allude to all the things Bryn said, that those all went really well. But I do think that the big catalyst of that performance was that intent, and exactly what Artie said is they really felt they'd let themselves down and the jersey down for the legacy and the history that jersey holds, is that you've got to front up every game.
I hear what Artie's saying, but I've heard it before. I've heard it in 2020, I've heard it in 2022, I've heard it in 2023. You know,
I don't think you've heard it when they've won.
Yeah.
So you've heard it before.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could still see he was fuming.
Yeah.
And that was the difference for me. I don't think you've gone to the post-match interview and you've heard the first thing he say, it shouldn't take that.
Yeah.
Now, even when he's being positively promoted by Goldie, he was getting the pump up and he was like, no, So before the fact and before the result, absolutely, but never after the fact. So I feel like there was still that edge. And I suppose it's probably because of the mountain that's ahead as well. They know that performance, although it was emphatic, they're going to still need to go another level to beat South Africa.
How do you maintain the edge, Bryn? How do you keep it there? Because when I look back through, let's say 2022, 2 losses to Ireland, they go and get that win in South Africa, then they fall off again, and then they lose to Argentina, then they come back against Argentina, and then they lose to Australia, and then they come back again. How do they keep that edge week in, week out?
It comes down to your preparation. It's a massive part around it, and I think, the messages Sam Cane actually said after in the press conference was around, they made it real lean. Their menu was really lean, and in saying that, I think most of the time, we've touched on it quite a bit, that when you feel like there's a bit of clutter, the indecision that you have might be for a split moment in certain parts of your game. You're not able to be real decisive. And on the weekend, it just seemed like they were all on the same page and they were able to then go through the team. And I think you saw that with that gain line percentage, Ross. It was 40%, it was 34% last week. And that's the difference in terms of if you win that gain line battle and you win that physicality, which we're able to do. The examples that why it's really important is if you look at Bodie's try and Will Jordan's try, the carry and clean, especially on Will's second try, is that it was 4 good carries from the forwards, being able to go over the advantage line. And then you look at the animation of the phase play with Jordi Barrett to be able to play square. Rieko Ioane runs a nice little tip line that draws in 2 players, and Will Jordan is out the back just because we're going on front of on our front foot. And so the difference that we weren't able to do against the English was that we weren't able to get that good go forward ball. Then our backs were able to have that phase play shape. And actually there was another one as well, Beauden Barrett's try. If you look at the animation of Will Jordan, of him out the back to get defenders to sit down and have to second guess, was really evident. And you only get that when you're winning a game, when you're winning that gain line consistently, and the All Blacks were able to do that. So it's going to be a much bigger challenge when we're going to go up against the South Africans because they are bigger men, and especially with that line speed pressure that they will bring. But it's a massive pat on the back for the All Black forward pack, that if they are going to have any chance against South Africa, those percentage numbers are going to have to be very, very similar, and they can obviously have the kicking game that they're able to exit really well on the weekend as well.
And I think on that 40% of the gain line, like people will be like, oh, that's only 6-7% more than last week. Like how can that be so drastic? That's the equivalent of 50% in the dry. Okay, so the wet weather conditions allows line speed to always dominate because you've got to really catch and then deliver, like passes aren't as crisp, you've got to stand a little bit closer. So all these things play against you on attack to getting that gain line. So in the wet to get that 40%, because like before I saw the numbers, I was like, man, that just doesn't seem right. Like it felt like they were a lot more dominant. And then when you actually go back and watch it, there's a few bobble passes or a pass behind here, and it's just the conditions that haven't allowed them to I suppose, have that dominance. So the 40% is actually a hell of a lot better than it reads in those conditions.
And that first ruck, 3.5 seconds last week, 3 seconds this week.
And for that, in that weather, is even more impressive than half a second. That's probably more like a second and a half in dry conditions. So that's how efficient they were. And I think, what was it? They only had 15 turnovers. Again, in those conditions, 15 turnovers, I think 10 of them handling. Like they were just on. And I do think the simplicity of the game plan, and rugby isn't complicated, it's just complicated by us at times, is run, carry hard, clean hard, tackle. And I do think that's one area that probably has been overlooked, is how well they held Argentina out, especially in the 22. 7 visits for 1 try. They tackled at 91%. And, like their discipline was only 10 penalties, like 10 and under is pretty good. You want to be pushing the boundaries, but you don't want to, lose control of that. So defensively, they were much better. They were much more urgent. And I think there was a ball on the ground. It might have been Josh Lord or I can't remember who it was, but there's like 3 black jerseys diving on it. Those are the little effort areas when you see that, or contestable kicks, you're going to win it in the air so that you're in the power. All those sort of, as I know Leon likes to call it on attack, is that competitive edge. Are you going to win that competitive edge? Are you going to dive on that loose ball? Are you going to win the tap backs? Those sorts of things they won, and that's just character. That's not coaching. So that I go back to that intent. How do you keep it fresh? You have to be clear in the way you plan and prep your week, that you turn up in the same mental shape. And we spoke a lot about the work they would have done, in that mental space. I would say a lot of that will now be sort of ingrained into their routine to make sure they are fresh. And some weeks, as the season gets on, they're going to have to do less time on the grass. But that's when visualisation comes in. That's where all these sorts of tools and expertise that they have around them, they can utilise. I said it before the Irish series. If they can go there and go 2-0, like I said, Ireland will be the best team if they can go there. If the All Blacks can do the same thing, man, that would be... I'd put it up there with 96.
Yeah.
First series win in South Africa.
Yeah.
In terms of where we're at and where South Africa are at and where we are in terms of, I suppose, our building phase and I suppose that depth of squad that South Africa are now building.
That was incredibly impressive. The way that they completely switched up their team for that second test and, it was tighter through the first 50 minutes, but boy, they pulled away at the end and it was a completely different looking 23.
Yeah, it was, but it was a lot tighter. And had Australia just, man, they just fell off a cliff. They just couldn't live with them towards that last 20 minutes. And again, I know this sounds so simple to put it to this, but penalties into the corner, mauls, they just have no answer for it. I mean, I say it again, they are very good individual players, but stopping a maul requires so much clarity of thought and role and not overachieving one way that you share them around the corner, and it's all based on feeling and, that timing of when you hit and they continue, because they're so desperate, they continue to fly in ones and twos and it just works into the favour of the Springboks.
Yeah, it comes back to clarity. And just to touch on that last 20 minutes for the Australians, they had 5 penalties in that last 20 minutes, and they had 3 penalties within the first half. So in that first half, I felt that they actually held on really well. To be able to beat 13-11 at half time, they didn't give the opportunities for the South Africans to get in there. Fussie's try, which was obviously great counter-attack ability, but they just didn't give them opportunities for that line-out more. And then, like we said, the ability to stay on in crucial moments in the back end of games, they went to the line-out more, and Malcolm Marx scores 2 tries, and that's really the end of the game. So I think it's a good reminder for the All Blacks. I think in that second half, when the bench came on, the penalties, that was at the highest count within that first 20 minutes in the second half. There were a lot of penalties, so it just shows for the All Blacks that if you don't get it right, and it's a little window of 20 minutes, the South Africans really will punish you. So I can imagine Jason Ryan and all the leaders will be in and around. Discipline will be massive, which the Australians weren't able to do in that last 20 minutes of that test match.
Bryn, the South Africans entered their 22 12 times. So it really could have been a much bigger scoreline than it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably one thing if you're the South Africans, you're walking away, with a pretty convincing win, but knowing that there's plenty left in the tank. Especially in that first half, I think there was a try that was pretty much butchered by the number 10. It was when Colby made a line break, and he's pretty much walking in if he just catches that ball. And then a couple of times inside the 22, weren't able to score the points that they were wanting to. So if they were to strip back their game, they'd be pretty frustrated in that first half. And look, I know there are a lot of changes and whatnot, but I think with what we've touched on, with where they feel that they are right now, they'll be bitterly disappointed with where they see themselves in the top of the world. So it could have been a lot worse, but I think with the group that they had there, it's good for their depth in terms of the players that they're able to play. They had multiple changes. Yes, they had World Cup winners that were still in that squad, a lot of them coming off the bench, but it's invaluable the amount of minutes those men were able to play. And I guess when you're building depth within squads, it's not always going to be to a high standard, but knowing that group, they'll be thinking, right, we could have been better in that first half, and we were really good in that second half with that kind of 60 to 80 minutes that I touched on with those line-up maul tries.
But a lot of it was their big dogs coming onto the park as well. Yep. So I think it's a great game from a growth point of view because they won, but they can also say to them, if you play that game and you leave that many opportunities out there against an Ireland or a France or an England or a New Zealand, you'll lose. So it's been good for South Africa to have that win and change the squad up. But maybe I'm being a bit hard on Australia on attack. They did tackle at 91%, and I do feel they aimed up. But the week before, when they had that main 23 out there, well, despite a couple that people can argue about, but pretty much their main 23, there wasn't an opportunity they missed, the Springboks.
Let's talk a bit about Argentina then, because I think it was a little bit surprising maybe what they didn't bring in comparison to what they brought the week before. Did that surprise you?
It didn't, and the reason why I predicted, and I actually said to a number of people and they laughed at me, I said I think the All Blacks will win and they'll win well, is one, the way that the All Blacks will respond, you expect it. But two, just the way just things that were coming out of the Argentinian camp. They're like, no, we don't fear Eden Park. Ugh, Eden Park, it's nothing. And, the All Blacks, yeah, no, of course we can win every time we play them. It just felt like their edge and focus had gone, like it was just going to happen. And that's their biggest growth as well, is this inconsistency. They were the same against the French. The first time they played the French, which is the B-side, they were just all over the place, similar to the other night. And they didn't make adjustments on the run. And then they bet them, and then obviously came here and did one on New Zealand through desperation and hard work and great preparation. And then I just felt like their edge or their focus was a little bit off. But I mean, I'm not in their camp. I'm just picking up on what I read and saw on the news and sports reports and so forth.
Let's talk a little bit about adjustments on the run, because we've had a good question through. We'll give the Players Sports Gilbert Ball through to Trent Hohaya for this question. Quite interesting, I thought, considering what you said earlier about the All Blacks and how they were able to adjust this time around, but not in the first test. He says, it has been commented on that in the first test against Argentina, the All Blacks went away from the game plan. What does it take from players on the field in the middle of a game to consciously change the game plan? What are the signs on the field that the plan needs changing? Who makes the decision? And how is it practically enacted, Bryn?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good question. I think it's internally your main shot call drivers, right? So, for example, if we went, let's use the All Blacks as an example. We go to a contestable game. That's our first 20, 30 minute. That's our mindset of that's how we're going to run the game. But we're not getting what we wanted for whatever reason. Maybe the caterpillar isn't to where we want it. Maybe the execution of the kick isn't good. Or maybe we're just not getting the ball back when it comes to contestables. So in game, that 20, 30 minutes, we might come together, whether it's your 9, 10 lock and the decision makers within the group, saying, we're not getting what we want out of this. Let's kick long. So we saw that adjustment the next week, but let's just say in game, right, we're not getting that. We want to kick long now. Let's try fine grass. There's space in the middle of the field. They're a bit shallow on the edges, thinking for the contestable game. Let's go down the middle. So that might be an example. Also another one, like if we feel like we want scrum dominance and we're not getting the scrum dominance there, okay, right, we can't get what we've got and we're under pressure. The Springboks might be putting us under pressure. Let's just get the ball in and out. So let's be able to get a quick feed. The number 8 can go off and Artie Severe can carry. So I think that is done within the leaders, and I guess your main drivers, your hooker, your lock, your number 8, your 9, your 10, and maybe your outside back. Those kind of guys are all kind of prepped even before a game of what the mindset is, and then in game you're making those decisions, having those conversations between each other. Or there might be a message that's coming from up top through that helicopter view and seeing something completely different within the first 30 minutes. There's a water boy that comes on and they say, look, we're not getting what we want out of here. For another example, we want lightning quick ball. Right, get your body height lower. Let's get through the tip game so we can get through the seam and talking it through like that. So those are probably two examples where I find that's kind of how the adjustments and how it's kind of talked about within players, and then maybe from a helicopter view of coaches bringing on messages that maybe players have missed out on the field.
And I think it happens during the week, doesn't it, Bryn? It's not so much about making decisions on the run. Like, your preparation plays a big part in you having the ability to adjust and change. And by that is having discussions around scenarios. So for forwards, what is the line-out setup we're all most confident about? That we know when we go to it, we're just going to win the ball. Okay, well, that's going to be our go-to. So when we get under pressure, boys, this is what we're going to go to. And these are the 3 options. No confusion, that's what we're doing. Boom, so when we're in the huddle, okay, we're going to our go-to, or whatever name or language they have. Boom, everyone runs off, they've got that confidence, we've all agreed to it, bang, we nail it. Okay, boys, we've been turned over twice using the tip because we've made too good at inroads and they're blocking our cleaners. Tips off, we're going to run direct and we're going to be carrying strong through them and allow the tip to come later in the game once they're starting to tire and they can't attack our ball as well. So it's all those sorts of discussions rather than, because so often people be like, oh, the tip's on, the tip's great. You're making 10 metres, but they've actually designed their defensive system to block these 2 guys. So they want the tip to go through 10 metres so they can get the turnover. So it's not necessarily just looking at the outcome and going, oh, the cleaners aren't getting there. It's saying, okay, what if this happens? What are we going to go to? Oh, okay, the guy out the back's just getting smashed. Or we feel, so for example, from forwards to backs maybe, Bryn, is we feel like we're just running into a brick wall all the time. And, you know, we turn around and we say to the first 5, you're not engaged in behind us. So defensively, they don't have to make any decisions. And that's just too easy. You just can tee off, whether they do a tip or whatever, they can tee off. So it's just understanding the systems and knowing when you're at your very best, what is in play, what is in place. And then I think when you're under pressure is simplifying it. Like that's why you always go to like a go-to throw. We're not talking about 20 slips. It's normally just in and out. You know, we're not talking about tricky moves or anything on attack. It's just carry hard, clean hard. So you get your mojo back and then you can build back into the game and then make decisions based on how the defence has adjusted since you made those adjustments.
How much of that is about what you're hearing from the water boy or what you're hearing from the physio coming on in comparison to what you're hearing from your teammates around you?
The messages that do come on, they pretty much are exactly kind of the same things that players do talk about. So very rarely do you hear a different message in terms of how the game is going. So, you know, I don't know, there might be for a breakdown example, like I think what Jip just touched on, like we're not getting through the advantage line. Let's get through a tip. Let's have an animation of our 10 out the back just so we can get through the seam. Or like sometimes we might be a little bit high at contact. Water might come on and say, boys, our body height's too high. We need you to get lower at the point of contact. Our cleaners are too high. So those kind of messages are set in between, but mostly players in critical kind of mini unit groups are having those conversations. So when you see there's a stoppage of play, most teams, whether it's backs and forwards, would come together in a circle. You get a deep breath, get your process to be able to reset, and then you're having those conversations around what you might be seeing. You know, Will Jordan might be saying, boys, there's one in the backfield. Like I know we've talked around going to contestable, but let's kick to the left corner because that fullback's up quite a bit. So those kind of things are kind of having conversations that pretty much in game, in scenarios, or kind of in those kind of mini unit meetings in the stoppage of play.
The other thing is the captain. People automatically assume that the captain is the person who takes the bull by the horns and makes this happen. Is that a major part of this?
Depends the makeup of your leadership group. Every team's different, but you know the captain's going to be asking questions if you know there's a high error count or you're getting dominated in it. The question will be, is it attack? Is it defence? Okay, who leads attack? Who leads defence? And the question will be like, okay, what are we going to go to? It's not necessarily them having the solution. It's going to the person they've, I suppose, empowered for that area, and they should have the answer due to the work they've done during the week.
I suppose because the captain especially, you know, if you've got your head in a ruck a lot of the time, how are you to necessarily know the answer to that question?
100%.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to, but you also can't wait, you know, for it to happen 4 times before you demand something to change.
Thank you very much for your question, Trent Hohaya. So the Players Sports Gilbert Ball coming your way. Remember, we've also got the Sam Whitelock book for next week, so send in your questions. You could be in the chance to win either one of these next week. So plenty on the line there. More questions. We had lots of questions come through this week and some really good ones too. And I thought ones that might cut to the heart of, I suppose, what we're about, trying to explain how the game really works. Because as the game's evolved away from a forward pack and a back line, and we've had forward pods and there's intermingling of all sorts of people in different areas of the field, I think for your average rugby fan, it's become a little bit difficult to exactly understand the role of each position and what they play. So this question came from Alan Smith within the YouTube comments section. It says, some of the forward pod play is hurting New Zealand rugby. As soon as the forwards start playing as a tight 5 with pick and go, we score tries. For me, the forward pod system is hurting our style of rugby. If the forwards played tighter and together more with more pick and go, we create more space for the backs. Bryn, what's your thought on that? The evolution of the game and how it suits the way Kiwis play?
I can see it. Look, well, if you look at the Blues, for example, that was pretty much their DNA of how they won a championship. They pretty much went through the middle of teams, whether there was off 9, you had Caleb Clark, you had Mark Tilley that were going in and around those rucks, really tight to the rucks, and we're able to get over the advantage line. Now, what that does do, if you're going forward, it's great because you're going backwards. You're going backwards a lot, and then it does open up for you to be able to pull trigger as a backline. But I think in the international game, it's a lot harder to be able to do that. The percentage gain line is around that 45% on a good day. I think the Blues are up that kind of 60%. So if you don't get that right, it narrows up your field, and then it makes it a lot easier. If you don't get that good go forward ball, it's hard to then attack. If you've got pretty much 5 to 6 forwards and you've got a full line that's compressed to be able to then for the backs to attack, or that maybe loose forward that's on the edge, it is really hard to attack. So if you do get it right, like the Blues were able to, and if the All Blacks were able to have that kind of success with those numbers, then it's a great way to be able to have attack. But, you know, I'd question if that you'd want that to be your DNA consistently throughout a whole match. There might be periods in time where you might have specials that you feel that you want to go through the middle for maybe 2 players or a few times within the game. But I still think if you look at Will Jordan's try, you look at Jordi Barrett's try, the phase play shape that we were able to do because the pod system of how our forwards were able to carry and clean a little bit wider. Yes, sometimes a little bit of a pick and go, but it was in that traditional 3-pod shape. I think that probably is the way to go, with maybe seeing a bit of space of a pick and go like a Blues, more kind of, if you have that feel and you see the opportunity that there's space there to go in that pick and go.
It depends where it is on the field for me. In the 22, I totally agree. Pick and go, it works really well for both the All Blacks, the Blues. The Blues don't pick and go from halfway. It's a waste of energy. So it goes back to what I was trying to get to with the Wallabies is you've only got so much in the tank, and it's about how you use that energy and how best you use it. And sometimes actually not having the ball and putting it back and being able to counter ruck or put their skill set under pressure is more valuable and actually takes a lot less energy and physical energy to get that dominance. So, look, valid point in the 22. Especially from 10 metres in.
The attacking 22?
Yeah,
or also
if
the
we're on
defensive
attack.
22?
No. A defensive 22, you've got to get to parts of the field to execute your kick strategy. It would take like 6 rucks to get there versus 1 pass to get to the 15 to allow the ability to attack blind, because it's not just, kick strategy doesn't just involve kicking. It's like, man, if they drop back and it's on, we go. Sort of like TJ did with Will Jordan. But then it's 1 ruck, it's 1 pass, less chance for error. You pick and go, you might fall or you might lose feet or you might seal off. Very risky. Penalty, it's bringing the ref right into play. So I understand when they see tries and they're like, why can't we just do that? It's just positionally in the field, and as we've spoken about with the Wallabies against South Africa, we can't give them easy penalties into our half, let alone 22. So it's about balancing risk versus reward. And you can heighten that risk when you get into the 22, as we saw with Artie's try.
Yeah.
You
could see everyone tight, and the backs weren't even looking for it, and they were just going to keep going until they went over.
Basically, the modern pick and go is the tip pass, is it? Is that what it is? The tip pass where you're in that pod and you have that short pass from one person to the next that spreads the defence out wide, and that almost is kind of like a pick and go in the modern game in order to hit that gain line.
I think a lot of the time a pick and go will come off a good carry.
Yeah.
So normally it's a good strong carry with a good clean, and what you're trying to create is an edge to go around. So if here's the carrier and he gets a tip away and the tip goes in there, and then he follows that round and creates an edge and creates depth in the ruck, you're just going to pick and go. You'll grab 3 or 4 metres right there. And it's the same for when you just go to a pick and go from in the 22, like with Artie's try, watch the clean. I think it was Tamati Williams fell short. You watch the clean that cleans that corner for Artie to even take his time and then still score. It's all about pick and goes are all worked on how you corral people back into the ruck, or you make the ruck deep enough they have to go round, so you're just picking up easy metres through there. But mainly only happens in the 22 from a risk point of view. Because there's so many rules around the breakdown, it's just too risky.
and these days, Brendan, you can't even touch a halfback, as Willie Hines found out.
We're a protected species, mate. We're absolute protected species.
Within a metre, once you step 1.1 metres outside that breakdown, good night, nervous.
What actually makes it funny for me, though, is like when it's actually not a halfback, it's actually a lot more play on in terms of like having a go if you're classed as a halfback.
Yeah, I know. It's like, shouldn't it just be the same whoever's playing half?
Yeah.
It's like it's only if you got the 9 jersey on, you get protected.
There's some lobbying going on, isn't there?
The only reason why is because we milk it, don't we? We just pretty much had putting our hands up or being able to have a look at the ref and being able to have a chat to him. So it didn't work for me on the weekend, but tends to happen a little bit more with the 9s. than just your stock standard prop that's playing halfback.
The other question that we have related to this, we've mentioned the word attack shape in the last little while. We had a ThamCham357 from YouTube. He sent through, basically, can you clarify what an attack shape is? People say Wayne Smith innovated in this space. Has there been any evolution since? Can you get out the whiteboard? What is an attack shape?
Yeah, I suppose traditionally the All Blacks, well, initially, the All Blacks went to that 1-3-3-1 shape. So it's the split of your forwards across the field in a phase play sense. So you normally had, I think we can remember Kieran Reid was fantastic on the edge, and then you had Dane Coles on another. And sometimes that would change depending on the strike. It might have been Jerome Kaino and Kieran Reid. It might have been Dane and Jerome, whatever it was. Yeah. There was one player on the edge, and then there was the pods of three throughout. And it was making sure that, as I said before, like making sure that the back's engaged in behind that pod, and these players are all active, so that you're running down the field and defenders are having to make decisions based on your attack shape. It's designed to make them make mistakes, and then you make the right call. Similar to those two tries, Bryn referenced with Rico's down line. You have to defend him because he's going to go through and score, draws that player, and Will Jordan is in their attack shape and then scores an easy try. But I think it was Jordi Barrett who made the right decision on that time to go out the back. They read the body language. And then Damien's decision not to go to Will and hit a short ball to Beauden Barrett on the down line because they were more interested in Will. So the shape's there. Everyone has their roles within it to run lines, to attract defenders' attention, but it is all off the back of the person with the ball making the right decision as well. Forwards included, it's not just the backs. And
so then the backs exist behind the 1-3-3-1 or whatever variety of that shape, Bryn?
Yeah. Yeah, so if we're using that 1-3-3-1 as an example, you know, as forwards, you'd probably predominantly throughout the week, you'd know exactly where you want to be. Usually your tidies are in that 3-3 in the middle of the field, from the 15 to the 15, and then obviously you have your one on the edge, whether it's a hooker or an 8, or like Jip said, you might have your loose forward who's really good on the edge. So, and then predominantly you'd have a 10 or a 12 that's behind both those pods in the middle of the field. So what their job is really is to be able to be animated, like we're talking about, but at the same time, queuing up those forwards around what they're seeing in front of them. Because sometimes as forwards, when they're doing scrum, line out, there's a bit of fatigue. They're their eyes in terms of where that fourth or fifth or even what's in front of them. So, you know, they might see if they're really disconnected, they're saying the tip's on, like, you know, Cody Taylor's carrying, you've got Tupou Vai coming on a tip ball, saying the tip ball's on, or if they're a bit tight, we want to go out the back and say, yep, hit me out the back. And so it's really important for the 10, usually, that's in behind that first pod to give that communication, but then also it's very, very important at the second pivot, which is usually your 12 or your midfielder, is being able to queue up those guys that are the second pod outside them, because sometimes if you miss the jump, you miss the opportunity to be able to go. If Damien McKenzie's coming around the corner and he wants to attack that hole outside that 4th, 5th, 6th defender, but that second pod isn't engaged, then they miss that opportunity. So the 12 that's usually in behind that, or a midfield back, is queuing up those forwards, say, be ready, get on your front foot, make sure you're going forward and hitting those holes. Or it might say, hold your feet a little bit because we've lost that gain line battle within that first pod. Hold your feet a little bit because that line speed pressure is going to come. So it's really important, those two guys that are in the back, they're communicating to the forwards what's in front of them to be able to help them make a better decision. But at the same time, it is an execution thing of what the forwards, they do that much work in and around the tip play, seeing what's in front of them, the tip ball, be square, hitting that line. So it's more so the backs in behind that are trying to help them out and I guess tell them what to do, especially under fatigue.
That 1-3-3-1 seems to be the predominant shape. Are we seeing the Springboks use that shape? Are we seeing the Wallabies use that shape?
Oh, at times, but I think it's adjusted. Like even the All Blacks have adjusted to, sometimes they've got 4 and they'll hit the wide guy, the third guy, and he can play a tip roll or a carry. Sometimes your second 5 or your centre promote through that forward pod and they're the main ball carrier, have a tough carry. So there's definitely an evolution of it. And there's, you know, geez, sorry, Bryn, I was about to say Harbour's won this year. I was about to try to give another variation because I asked Bryn a few questions the other day as to why their setup was a certain way. But there's many, it doesn't really matter. It's whatever the design is to be designed to your strengths and your skill set. Yeah. And hopefully within your strengths and your skill sets, you're making defenders make more poor decisions than not.
We saw the Irish do a couple of interesting plays. They had 5 in the pod at one point against the Springboks, didn't we? There's some interesting plays.
And sometimes teams will just do that at the start so that you've done all your prep all week and you're looking for this 1-3-3-1 and then it's like 1-4-2-2 and you're like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's 9 forwards, 1-4-2-1 or whatever it is, but like they'll change it up and then they'll go back to their status quo. So it's just you're making defenders think. And I think one of Wayne Smith's biggest innovations was part of that, but I think it's his click attack or the turnover attack. He really changed the game in terms of the energy and understanding that you've got 15 seconds to make that count and then defence will be in that system. So he really focused on making sure that you made the best use of that 15 seconds, whether it's through kick, pass, run.
Let's talk about the wingers on the weekend. We saw Caleb Clark on the left, retrieving maybe the 2 box kicks that went up that weren't charged down.
Yep.
We saw Will Jordan very successful on the right. Is that the combination that best suits this team right now?
Yeah, look, I always think at the All Blacks, your only currency is your performance. And could I say, 3 weeks ago it should have been that? No, because I thought Severufus was playing outstanding. I always go back to, when talking about the All Blacks, it's not a development team. You've got to pick guys that are in form and you've got to trust that people know the system, that guy, next guy up or someone who's in more form can go. Those two currently, off the basis of that, yes.
Yeah.
That make-up with Bodie at 15 is world class, and they've got the confidence. And make no mistake, the work that Will did off the ball to create opportunities for others, freed up opportunities for Caleb and everyone else around, and Rico as well. And I was really rapt that Goldie referenced it when the try happened. He was like, that try would not happen with Rico. If that athlete wasn't there, he would not draw that attention that allows Will to score.
Yep.
So much, and that's why I'm always at pains to stick up for certain players, because I can see things that you if you're not in that rugby zone or you haven't lived and breathed how an attack shape works, you can actually always see the guys that do, Blackadder's another one, do the work that isn't going to be celebrated, isn't going to be on the highlights clip, but man, it's so valuable to a team and the systems and the structures.
We talked a lot last week about Blackadder and co, getting over that gain line, having people who can carry and get there. It felt like a big step up in that department from Blackadder, Bryn.
Yeah, it was. And I think at the same time, I think he's finding his rhythm. For a few years now, he hasn't been able to keep his body in check and been able to play consistently for long periods of time. So I think, especially at international level, he did, when he debuted it a few years ago, he was able to play. But I think the more time, we've talked around time in the saddle for certain positions. I think it's no different for Ethan, especially at international level. He's been able to do that at Super Rugby, but it's a different step up to be able to do that in international. And it comes back to all the areas that Jip's talking about. It's all the unseen work that Ethan does. He never stops. Whether it's a clean out, it's working off the ball, and on the weekend we saw the ball carries and the dominant tackles as well. So I just think it's going to be a continuation of him being able to play and be injury free to get more of the performance that we saw on the weekend, because Jip, the amount of unseen work that he does do, but I think to be able to do it at international level, which he's been able to do at the Crusaders, it's a pleasing fact for him to be able to stake his claim for that number 6 jersey.
Yeah, I think the most impressive bit was when he gave the ball out the back for Caleb's try. So easy, he's a tough man. He loves collision, loves contact, lives and breathes for it. Could have been easy just to tuck that one under or be, tunnel vision, but I just think he had a very well-balanced game and he had real clarity of what his role was within that loose forward trio. And Tupou Vaa'i, for me, that's the best test he's played. That was nearly 10 out of 10. Quality, you're now seeing a guy that understands he's actually a big, powerful beast and he can go through people just as much as a Patrick Tuipulotu or a Scott Barrett. So I think he'll take a lot of confidence from that.
It's interesting because we got called out a few times over the weekend around our chat last week about big ball carriers. And I suppose what we were called out about by a couple of emails was the fact that the All Blacks are bigger than the other teams, that on paper, from a weight perspective, they're certainly generally bigger than the pack they're up against. So the question was more from these couple of riders about technique. Is technique the key here where it's going wrong as opposed to size?
No, because I don't think... when I say someone's big, I never think of it as weight and height. You know, it's the way they play, the feeling you get when you're sort of down on ground level with them. And certain players have that aura. And I think it's also the balance of the 8. So a Quagga Smith isn't a big dude, but there's certain parts of the game where he is a power athlete and he plays big, if that makes sense. So I'll never believe weights and heights on any sort of bio in my life, because everyone lies for their own ego. There's no doubt about it. And I'm sure the Saffers know they're so big they're probably just trying to bring it down a few kilos.
You were 6'4", 120, weren't you, Jip?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when I was having meetings with Chrono and Shag. I was like, yeah, nah, boys, I'm 115. Don't worry about it. I've got about 700 weights in my pocket. But no, you know, sarcasm aside, it's how they play and we probably haven't articulated it well enough. But when you look at a Springbok pack and you just have to take a look at the anthem and watch it go like that, and then also watch the balance of bodies. Like, you don't want a tall prop. You know, you don't necessarily want a tall hooker. Like Malcolm Marx is an outlier, because not a lot of tall hookers can do what he does, but he's strong. But it's how they play, and it's how their frame and their physique turns up. And at the moment, I would have said the All Blacks, you know, from 2011 to, you know, sort of 2017, had that aura of, you know, big bodies, good skill set. And I suppose that's all we're trying to do, is complement the Springboks. It's not just their size, it's not just their weight, it's how they utilise it and how they have that balance within the squad.
Now, you do look at this current All Blacks side, though. Lomax and Tamati Williams are very
well,
big
he was
men,
massive.
aren't they?
Actually, we sort of ran past his game. That performance is... Scrumming performance, you know what he's got around the field. That scrumming performance was second to none.
We're talking about Tamati now.
Yeah, sorry, I've just gone off track, but I'm annoyed with myself that I missed out on a front row's glory. But and I don't want to put too much undue pressure on him, but there's competition in Loosehead now. You know, like that was a scrum performance. You know, Ethan has been a formidable scrummaging, line-out, breakdown specialist, and that's what you need in that role, first and foremost at international level. If Tamati can keep challenging there, it's going to make that selection a lot harder. He was so good. So he's still so fresh in his Test career. They've come off a loss, put into start. You know, like some guys just... You know, and I think Darry's the same. They might not necessarily light up Super Rugby, but they're unbelievable at international rugby, because the basics of their game are just so pinpoint week in, week out. They always play at a 7 or above. You know, they never dip down to those 4s or 5s. And, you know, some players just have that at international level. And I think, you know, based on the pressure going into that week and the way Tamati performed, it would have given them a lot of confidence, that coaching group, that he is a genuine starting international prop.
Oh, I just think that the athlete, and we've touched on it actually as well. I think a couple of weeks ago we talked about him and Tossie and the reason why they were selected. There's obviously the scrummaging and the line-out and your set piece, but it's more so the athlete of what they can do. Both of them were both number 8s when they were growing up, you know, so their ability to attack. And I think with where the day and age of where international rugby is now, the props have to be able to do that. And so I think it's a real good strength that I think both Tossie and especially Tams on the weekend, even though his scrummaging was probably at the forefront, his ability in contact, he will be able to consistently win the game line battle, which I think is really important, knowing what we have against the South Africans. Now, is he going to be able to start? Do you bring him off the bench? You know, do you let the group be able to go out there, get the scrum set piece and be able to get their dominance with the South Africans, with what's coming, and then bringing it to Tamati on with that last 30 minutes, not only with the scrummaging, but his ability to be able to beat players one-on-one with his footwork and his ball ability late in the game. So I think with that performance, no difference from Ethan de Groot when he was, you know, thrust into it in South Africa not too long ago. Him and Lomax were given an opportunity and he took it. And so it adds great depth in terms of what those propping stocks are now. And it asks the question around, yes, can Tam's scrummage very, very well. He did that on the weekend, but I think it's more so his ability with ball in hand, which I think we'll see, which is massive for this All Blacks going into the South African series, I believe.
We're now in a 2-horse race. So I think Ethan, if his neck's all good, he starts.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning that, but that performance puts Tamari Williams on a genuine radar to start for the All Blacks.
I'm imagining that we'll be seeing Scott Barrett and Tuipulotu maybe for these test matches, so that size and that punch forward will increase in that Johannesburg test match. So.
Yeah, and I think, sort of using the Springboks before, is just getting that balance right. You can't just go, okay, Paddy's going to be the guy or Scott's going to be the guy. It's like, okay, well, they know they're the guys. Okay, so what is everyone else around him? Artie, 18 carries on the weekend. Can we get him down to 12? And he's not making 44 metres, he's making 56. And can we use those other 6 with a Paddy or a Scott or an Ethan, a Dalton? Dalton's a big body, or a Tamati, or whoever it may be. But can we move those carries around within our phase play shape that means it's not predictable? So they're not going to just come and solve the issue because, like, what did the Wallabies get? They got 3 entries. So we got 12 for 6 tries against Argentina. So the opportunity is going to be very, very minimal. So if we get 4 entries and we come away at that 50% rate of 2 tries, I think that would be a success. But those entries are going to have to count, and you're going to need to be very, very patient within that 22 and making sure you've got that energy in the tank to be able to do 40-odd phases in that 22. But that's where I come back to that balance of where you play the game, especially at Ellis Park.
Bryn?
Yeah, and I think what it has done, with Paddy and Scott being injured, it's opened up Tupou Vai and Sam Derry coming in, right? We talk around the depth in terms of what we've lost with Bratellik and Whitelock, giving the guys of Tupou Vai and Sam Derry opportunities to be able to have back-to-back test matches and win one in the way that they did, only adds to the depth. We talk around the South Africans having the changes and being able to build depth for the World Cup in a few years' time. I think, whether those boys play or not in the South Africans with Paddy and especially Scott coming back, it's added great depth in and around that. And if there are injuries, those 2 men, with how they played in those 2 test matches, are more than ready to be able to get another opportunity in a big test match.
I want to jump on Jordi Barrett's mojo too, Bruno, because I think he's been a little bit quiet through those first few test matches in comparison to what we're used to with the way that he hits the line, makes his tackles, and then provides those options off his boot as well. He seemed to find his way on the weekend.
Yeah, he did, and I think at the same time, it was... To be able to be a good 12, you've got to be able to have things that help you around that. So look, the Jip talks about it all the time. The collision area and the forwards winning the job up the front opens up for the guys like Jordi Barrett. So it makes it a lot harder when you're a 12 when you're not winning that consistently. Like, he's got the triple threat game, and what I loved with him on the weekend was the subtle touches that he had. Like that pass with him and Rico, even though he goes out the back, those opportunities when he had them, they were awesome. Well, they were awesome for him to be able to do that. And I think as well, also his carries, he was able to get over the advantage line. But this time, he wasn't going into 3, 4, maybe double shoulders. He was actually getting a one-on-one and then being able to get over that advantage line. And his kicking game is great defensively. His intent as well. I thought with a lot of the All Blacks, their intent on the weekend was just different from what we saw in Wellington. So I think, Kieran Reid actually touched on it yesterday. The mindset was probably a lot different of what they felt in this Auckland Test match. And I think Jordi was another person with that intent and that mindset with a lot of the All Blacks. He had it on the weekend. So hopefully this now can boost him now for the performance that we likely see, hopefully, with this 2-test series in South Africa coming up.
You speak about intent, it was there at the haka, man. Far out. Did you see Sam Cane and Artie and Rico? Sam Cane, I thought he was bloody going to jump out of his skin. It was, I don't know, you just got that feeling, and I know we've talked a lot about feeling or, sort of that gut feeling a lot today, but you can sense when a good performance is coming.
Yeah.
What the trick is now is making sure, they know exactly how you are saying to keep that edge, keep that fire burning so that you're right there on the cliff's edge.
And I think they'll know that. They'll know that there's a step up. We're talking about it and how impressed we are with the Springboks. So I think that All Black group will actually be going over there really excited I think the guys that have been over there, the challenge, the way that it'll be themed and worded throughout the week or the couple of weeks they're going to be over there, I think they'll be quietly excited and I guess confident that, if they do get things right, they have the possibility of being able to do something like the 96 that you touched on, Jip. Because it's got that kind of feel. They're a different South African team where they've been in the last couple of years. They're kind of seen now maybe as the number one team in the world, and I think they are with how they played and especially that Irish series as well. So I think it's an exciting time and it's going to be able to see, can they do what they did on the weekend and being able to get that right against the best team in the world at the moment? Time will tell, and hopefully it comes quick because I want to watch it.
You always say the All Black team goes into a test match expecting not to win. But given what you've just said about the fact that they've got nothing to lose, what is success out of these 2 games in South Africa, considering where South Africa is and where New Zealand is in the context of their development?
Oh, look, I have to stay true to what I always say, is the expectation, and it needs to remain, and I'm not going to be part of not having it remain. The Springboks are favourites and the expectation is they should win. I'm happy to say that. But the moment we start accepting losses is the moment that mystique and power and the care goes. And I'm just not going to play a role in that. I'm saying it now. Okay? So that's my expectation, is 2 wins.
Yeah.
And just because you're not expected to win, the reason why you get angry is because you think you can win. And that sharpens your focus and it sharpens your prep. But I still think the general public, for the most part, it's getting less and less. In conversations I've had with just random people that come and talk rugby, it does seem it's getting less and less. And I plead that we don't lose that.
But as a member of the general public, having never stepped on an elite rugby field, Brett, I'm saying 1-1 is very acceptable in this situation. Do you agree?
Geez, he's not behind my Braveheart speech, is he?
No.
He's accepting losses.
Accepting a loss in this particular scenario, given the context of the last few years.
I think most people accept 2 losses.
Yeah.
If the context of the last 2 years.
The expectation for us was to win. I just think the difference now is that I don't think we lose that. Expectations every time they go out there, we're going to pick the All Blacks because that's what we expect. And I think with what we've seen, especially in the last Test match, if they can get that right, then they give themselves every opportunity to, I think, beat South Africa. If they get those areas right, if our set piece is right, our game line's a lot better, we can kick on our own terms, we can take our opportunities. We've got all the ingredients and the group to be able to do that. But it's just that we are playing a different type of South African team, which class is probably the best team in the world. So the underdogs tag is probably something that we're not used to, and that's just where we are at this stage, I think, with how South Africa is going. So I expect us to be able to go over there and win. Now, can we do that? We'll have to be able to find it. But my expectation is that that group will be driven to go over there, to do something special that hasn't been done, 2-0 over there, and to still win the Rugby Championship. So that's my expectation. We'll have to see how that plays out, but I'm going 2-0 with my old mate Jipper.
But in the reality of this world, as it stands right now,
would be a very, very good outcome.
Yeah.
Yep.
There we go. So it is. That's actually success. 2-0 is great success, but 1-1 is actually quite successful considering there's a high probability of 0.
Well, it was 1-1 to Ireland, and look at we're still talking positively about them.
Yeah.
But this is a hell of a Springboks team.
We can't underestimate going to South Africa. Usually you get one bite of the cherry in South Africa and then we end up coming back home. We're then playing at Eden Park, and the playing at home is just a big factor. So for the fact that we have to go over there and play 2 test matches, if we can get 2-0 done, I think it's arguably probably one of our greatest feats in rugby. Put alongside that with the World Cup as win.
The 96 was huge.
Yeah.
But I can just see Cody Taylor in the corner of Ellis Park, just giving it the fist bang.
Giving it the marshy.
And the old TJ's just giving it the marshy.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it's something to look forward to. It's going to be a lot of fun. So that is 2 weeks away. Of course, we'll have another episode before that first game against the Springboks comes along. So thank you very much for joining us. Actually, before we go, Brenna, we got some fan mail for you this week. Brenna, I've been watching you for all the years. I love your game. My other point, just love that pink hoodie you were wearing last week. Brother up.
Come on.
Hey?
Fantastic. Who's that? Who was that, Ross? What was the name? What was the handle?
So this is via email.
Dan?
His name is Danford Grove.
Oh, Dan, thank you very much, mate. If I've got a pink hoodie, I'll actually get one out to you. So at Eden Park, so I'll see what I can do for you. Thank you.
Don't over-promise and under-deliver me, old mate.
Rightio. And thank you very much to our guy Dave from Eden Park, who sorts us out with our lovely kit week on week on week. He's in the studio with us today. So thank you for joining us once again. Thank you, Jipper. Thank you, Brenna. Thanks to everyone who helps this show get to where. Catch you next week. Mā te wā.